Alright everybody, so welcome back. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about my favorite cards from the Seaside expansion of Dominion to basically the cards I absolutely hate from this expansion of Dominion. Now, the reason why I decided to start with this particular expansion first, as far as choosing an expansion of cards that I like from the expansion to hate, obviously, is because Seaside is getting an upgrade. There is going to be a second edition coming out in April for Seaside. They're going to be removing like about 8 cards potentially, and they're going to be adding in 9 new cards. Now, they haven't told us what they're going to get rid of, although there is definitely conjecture and obviously ideas of what cards are going to get removed, and maybe some of the cards that I don't like will get removed. Who knows? But there might even be some cards I really like from this expansion that get removed too. So I thought we'd go over this, since Seaside is definitely on a lot of people's minds right now, for sure. Now, this isn't going to be an explanation of how the card works video. If you want to know how the card works, I do have 3 separate videos, part 1, part 2, part 3, called What's in the Box for Seaside. You can look those up on my YouTube channel. I have that. This is just going to be quick little, basically, what I have to say if I like the card, pros and cons, really quickly. Some will go by super fast because there's not much to say about them other than to say that I like them, okay? So let's just get started here. Without further ado, my favorite card from this expansion is Caravan. It's super fun. It's easy. It's a weaker version of Hireling, but I really like it a lot. Caravan, one of my favorite, definitely my favorite card from the expansion. Okay, so Smugglers is next. This is interactive, which is why I like it. You can gain a copy costing up to 6 that your opponent got a card. So if they got a really good one, like a gold, for instance, or a 5 costing card, then, you know, it's very interactive in that sense. I really like this card a lot. That's why it's my second favorite card in the expansion. Super fun, super interactive. Okay, Ghost Ship. Now, this is an attack card, yes. And I like attack cards, I really do. And this is definitely my favorite attack card from this expansion. There is a lot of interesting possibilities with this card. Unlike with Militia, which makes your opponent just discard 2 cards, and sometimes your opponent would just have, you know, a couple of victory cards anyways. They'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll just discard those victory cards because, hey, I wasn't going to use them anyway. So your attack really didn't affect me. This one is putting those cards back. Now, if they had those victory cards in their hand to begin with, now they're putting them back on top of their deck, which means their next turn is going to be equally as bad, right? That's why I like Ghost Ship, because of that reasoning, because there's a lot more going on with that idea. Now, towards the end of the game, Ghost Ship could potentially almost not be an attack card and almost be like, well, I have 5 action cards in my hand, and they're all good, but I wasn't going to be able to play them all because I don't have enough actions to play them all. But so your Ghost Ship is actually allowing me to put 2 back from my next hand. Oh, so now that means I'll have a powerful turn this turn and a powerful turn next turn. You know, so that's Ghost Ship. So, you know, it's still fun to play with. And obviously that could potentially happen too if you're playing this against your opponents. But that's why it's my 3rd favorite card. Okay, there's not much to say about Bazaar except that it's a good variant of the Village. Okay, it's my favorite variant of the Village in this expansion. Bazaar, awesome card all around. So that's why it's number 4. Okay, so Wharf is my 5th favorite card from the expansion. It's a fun duration to play with. I mean, as in you're getting 2 cards in a buy at the start of your next turn. That's really cool. That means instead of having 5 cards for your next turn, you'll have 7 instead, plus an additional buy. It's really fun. It's enjoyable. I like this one. So that's why it is my number 5 in the expansion. So my number 6 is Fishing Village. Now, just like with Wharf, you're getting an action and an additional treasure at the start of your next turn. You're getting something at the start of your next turn, which is very useful to have. Starting your turns off with 2 actions instead of 1 is super awesome. That's why it's my number 6. Okay, so Ambassador is my number 7. Once again, this is an attack card, but instead of simply getting rid of your potential annoying cards like the minus point cards and the copper cards. Instead of trashing them, you're putting them back on the supply and then still divvying them out to your opponents. So it means that the possibility that these minus point cards and copper cards are going to be spread around to your opponents rather than just simply getting trashed all the time. So that's why I like Ambassador a lot. It's definitely an interesting, interactive attack card for sure. And if you're not even playing with an attack card that is giving you minus point cards, I will still buy a minus point card if this is in the game, just so that way I can kind of tease my opponents by giving them those awful minus point cards. Now, what are they going to do? Are they going to do the same thing? Are they going to buy an Ambassador and a minus point card just to give me one? Probably not. They're probably not going to do that. It's just what I like to do. But that's why it is my number 7 most favorite card from the Seaside expansion. Now, Lighthouse is a variant of a reaction. It isn't a reaction, but it works and functions just like the Moat. And that's why it's my 8th favorite card in this expansion. Very interesting and different, obviously. I like Lighthouse a lot, so that's why it's my number 8. My number 9 is Outpost. Now, this one is basically giving you a second turn, which is why I like it. It potentially could be a very useless turn, of course. You can't obviously use this to get more than 2 turns if you had multiple outposts, so you're only going to buy maybe 1 or 2 for your entire game. But you could potentially get a second stronger turn, possibly. Potentially, you could possibly do that. It's possible. So it's super fun. I really like this one a lot. So that's why it is my number 9. So, okay, Embargo is my 10th favorite card, okay? Now, a lot of people do not like this card. It's actually, so Outpost is 8, and Embargo was 9. So, Embargo is my 9th favorite card. Now, this one is obviously going to be a card that could potentially hurt you as well as your opponents, which I don't hate. I actually like it. I mean, yes, I could potentially be hurting myself in the process later on down the road, but it's still very interactive, which was why I like it a lot. Plus, it makes your opponents think, is it worth buying that particular action card they really like, ooh, I don't know, Village, but then they get a minus point card in the process, or if I embargoed it multiple times, they could potentially have a possibility of getting even more. Is it worth it? Maybe not. To me, I don't care. I mean, I don't mind if I get a few extra minus point cards. It's just one of my fun little strategies. It's just how I play Dominion. I enjoy playing with this one. That's why it makes it to my top 10 favorite cards. That's why it's my number 9. But a lot of people do not like this card because of that. Because it's not an attack card. They can't protect against it because it doesn't have an attack on the name. So they can't use a Moat. They certainly can't use a Lighthouse to protect them. So unless you're playing with Trader or Watchtower from Hinterlands or Prosperity, unless you're playing with those, Embargo is almost impossible to basically avoid unless you're going to purposely avoid certain piles because they've been embargoed too many times. So that's why I like Embargo. Okay, so Tactician. Sometimes I like this one a lot, sometimes I don't. It's useful for those turns when you just don't have a good hand. If you have a Tactician and a horrible hand, this at least will improve your next hand for a strong, powerful turn. So that's why I like it. But towards the end of the game, Tactician becomes less likely to use unless you filled your deck with too many victory cards early on or something like that. This is fun to play with, though. Okay, so my next one is Salvager. Now, this is one of only 2 cards in this expansion that trash cards. This one is okay. It is useful if you're going to trash estates. And if you have a lot of silvers and you want to get rid of some silvers too, this one is good to use to get rid of those silvers as well. So that way you could possibly get something better, maybe a gold or something. Which is why I like it a lot, but it's not like useful to trash like those minus point cards. You could still do it, of course, for that, but you wouldn't get any benefit except for a plus buy. So just so you know, that's how that is going to work, but it's still fun to play with. I like this one. Okay, so Native Village is next. Now, I've had some good turns with this, and I've had some bad turns with this. This is contingent on you having a lot of native villages in your deck. If you've only got 1 or 2, this is almost pointless, because as your deck fills up, you'll play this less often, which means then you won't have a powerful turn towards the end, because you just won't have that many to get many cards on the mat for a powerful turn, because you weren't able to play this as much as you possibly could, which you should do. If you have 3 or 4, you should definitely try to go for 3 or 4 at least with this card. But yeah, it's enjoyable. I like this one. Okay, so Treasure Map. This is a card that's contingent on beginning of the game. You have to get this at the beginning of the game. If you do not, it's pointless. Don't bother buying it. If you're mid-game and you're like, ooh, I think I'll buy a Treasure Map, don't buy it. It's just not worth it. Do not buy it unless you can get it in the beginning of the game. And that means you have to get 2 copies in the beginning of the game. So it pretty much means that you won't be buying anything else when you have at least 4 money. That means if you even start your turn out, if you're playing your first 2 turns and you have 5 money, you still have to go for this if you want to get the 4 golds with the treasure map. You still have to do that. But another reason why this is okay, and because it's not my top 10, is because the 4 golds are going to the top of your deck once you are able to trash the 2 treasure maps. That means your next turn, which most likely will be your next turn, is going to have 4 golds in your deck, in your hand. And then who knows what the 5th card would be, but most likely it will not be an action card that's going to give you extra actions, or an action card that will give you extra buys. Most likely will not happen, especially if you're not playing with action cards that have extra buys. So now you've got 4 golds. What are you going to buy? I mean, seriously, are you going to buy a province on your 6th turn in the game? Is that going to be what you buy? Because you're going to have 12 treasure, which you can't use anything for. It seems almost pointless. So that's why it's not my favorite card, just because of that. Okay. Now, Pirate Ship. This one is a dud in a 2-player game. Okay? There's no point in getting this card in a 2-player game, because it is contingent on what your opponent draws. If your opponent draws a victory card and an action card, reveals those 2 cards, they don't trash anything, obviously. And that means you're not getting to put a coin onto your mat, which means now you've wasted your action playing this because nothing happened. Yeah, you're sure you discarded 2 of your opponent's cards, but really, is that super useful? Not really. Now, if you're playing a 4-player game, which I would recommend, you'd have to play with at least 4 people if you're going to play with the Pirate Ship. You'd have to play with at least 4. Then you possibly will at least get 1 of your 3 opponents, 1 of them, possibly at least 1, should have a treasure revealed, which you will trash, allowing you to put a coin onto the mat. That does not mean, however, that if multiple players who trash treasures, that does not mean you get to do it for each player who did. You only get to do it per pirate ship play. So the only way that's going to happen more often is if you play multiple pirate ships on the same turn. You can't do it that way. You can't get multiple coins. So that's another reason why this is kind of a dud, because you're only getting 1 coin per play of this, regardless, at the most. So it's going to take a few turns. It's going to take more than a few turns before the pirate ship really makes it worthwhile for the treasure, to get it for treasure. So you have plus money on your turn. That's why I consider it a dud in that sense. It's still okay for a 4-player game, but sometimes it is still not that great of a card, even in a 4-player game. Not the best attacker, that is for sure. Definitely not the best, but definitely not the worst either, and it's thematic, at least. It's thematic with the expansion Seaside. It's very thematic, which is why I don't hate the card, which is why I like it more than a lot of these other cards here, because it's still very fun to play with, as long as you are playing with a certain player count, for sure. And obviously, it also will make it so your opponents trash, possibly in the beginning of the game, coppers. Another reason why I don't like it as much as some of the other ones is trashing coppers is only helping your opponents out, because most likely they will have silvers and golds. If they didn't get any silvers at this point, well, then that's their own doing, because that's something you should just be doing. The first few turns, you should buy a silver. If you don't do that, it's almost like you're hurting yourself. So most likely this isn't going to hurt your opponents too much. So that's why it's not the strongest attack, because you're possibly trashing their coppers. If you're still playing this for the attack towards the end of the game and you get lucky enough to trash a gold, hey, that's a random occasion with this card for sure. That does not happen. It's rare for sure with Pirate Ship. So, because by that point you're probably playing it for the money, not for the attack. So that's Pirate Ship. Okay, Warehouse. Now, this one is good. If you're playing with people who know how to play this game, this card is good because you get 3 cards, you get an action, then you can discard 3 cards, and most likely you know which cards you're going to discard. Even if you have a hand full of good cards, you can be like, okay, I'm going to discard this copper and this silver and this 1 action card because, hey, I got golds, I've got good action cards all around, and I've strengthened my turn. I'm going to have a powerful, fun turn thanks to Warehouse. But that's another reason why this is so close to bottom of my barrel, because if you're playing with somebody who's new to the game or has analysis paralysis, then you're sitting waiting for them to finish their turn, and they're spending 10 minutes, literally 10 minutes sometimes, looking at all the cards and trying to figure out what they're going to have to discard now because of Warehouse. There's a lot of analysis paralysis with this card with some players, and there's one person I know who literally took 10 minutes figuring out which cards he wanted to get rid of because he liked all his cards. So I just won't play Warehouse with that one particular person, which I will not say his name. But the point is, that's why it's not my favorite card. That's why it's so close to the bottom of the barrel. That's Warehouse. Okay, so Treasury. Why is this card even lower on my list than even Warehouse is? It's because it's too powerful. Okay, it's too powerful. Don't get me wrong. I like powerful cards, but if we're playing with Treasury, it quickens the game so fast that you can literally play a game of Dominion if you're playing with this card in, like, I don't know, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, the game is over. That's how fast the game is. If you want a game of Dominion to only last 10 minutes or 15 minutes, then you're going to want to play with this card because it basically makes your turns super powerful. You get to keep this, meaning you get to put it back on top of your deck when you play it after your turn is done if you didn't buy a victory card. Okay? If you have 5 of these, if you're playing a 2-player game, which is even worse if you ask me, this is almost too powerful for a 2-player game for sure. If you have 5 of these in your hand and then you play them and you have a powerful turn and you don't buy a victory card, then they go back to the top of your deck. So your next turn is 5 more treasuries. That means 5 more cards, 5 more money, 5 actions. It just makes the game go by so fast. The game is over before you know it. I don't like that at all. That's why it's so close to the bottom of the barrel. I still enjoy it. It's fun, but it's just too powerful, and it really erases the whole strategic way of playing Dominion for me, and it turns into basically a rat race. I don't like that. That's why Treasury is so close to the bottom of my barrel for Seaside. Okay, so Sea Hag. Okay, what the pros and cons about Seaside? Okay, so the cons for this is you don't get any benefit from playing this. You're not getting money, you're not getting cards, you're not getting actions. You're wasting an action playing this sometimes because of that reasoning, because you get no benefit to playing it. You're literally just playing it to attack your opponent because you're not getting a benefit for it. Now, that I like that. I don't hate that. I can't say I hate that. But because of that, it's not as fun, at least in this sense. Yes, you get minus point cards, you're giving them out to your opponent. It costs 4, so you're getting them out faster than most of the other ones anyways. And because it also causes your opponent to discard the top card of their deck, after the minus point cards are gone, you can still use this as an attack to hurt your opponent, but it becomes a very, I guess, middle-ranged attack card to a very weak attack card, okay? By that point, it becomes too weak of an attack card to play, and then what's the point of having them in your deck? Now, if you're playing with Salvager and you get a couple of these just to attack your opponent, then hey, now I have something I can use my salvager with to get rid of some sea hags, and I'll have some extra treasure for a better buy or something like that. But it's contingent on that possibility. It's not super awesome in that sense. It's still not as bad as some of the other ones here, but it's just not as good as an attack card as I would like. So that's Sea Hag. Okay, so this one is contingent on a copper strategy. Cut Purse here is contingent on a copper strategy. If you are playing with cards like, I don't know, Apothecary from Alchemy, that basically rewards you for having lots of coppers, or you're playing with Fountain, which is going to give you tons of victory tokens, or victory points, I should say, from Empires, if you have a lot of coppers. Or you're playing with, the Bandit Fort Landmark, which gives you negative points for having silvers and golds, which means then you need to hold on to more coppers, otherwise you're going to have tons of negative points. If you're playing with one of those cards or landmarks, then Cut Purse is a good attack card to have, because it's basically discarding their coppers in their hand. It becomes very useful for that. But if you're not playing with those particular strategies, this is a dud. Because in the beginning of the game, it's useful a little bit, but in most often the case, they're already trashing coppers if they can. So most likely, there just won't be any coppers to reveal. At mid-game, there possibly will be many times when there's no coppers to be revealed because they have silvers and golds by now. And then you're only doing this for the 2 treasure benefit, which I just don't think is worth it. Playing this action card is pointless mid-game by that point. Unless, like I said, you are playing a particular strategy, which is why I don't hate it, because there are still some uses if you're playing with certain cards or certain landmarks or events or something like that. It's still contingent, though, on particular cards, which is why it's pretty much bottom of the barrel for me. So that's Cut Purse. Okay, so Pearl Diver. There are some times when this is fun. Getting to put a gold on top of my deck that was sitting on the bottom of my deck, that is cool. I like that. That's fun. Getting a card in an action, and if you have multiple Pearl Divers, you could potentially get some really good cards that were sitting on the bottom of your deck. But that's still contingent on the fact that your bottom of your deck has good cards. Often the case, I find myself finding just horrible cards on the bottom. A copper. I don't want to put a copper on top of my deck in a state. Same thing. I don't want to do that, most likely. Unless I have a card that gives me tons of actions and I have a salvager around. Then that could be potentially useful. But it's still contingent on all those things actually working out. But still, it's very thematic. I like it for that reasoning, too. But it's just not the best card there is, which is why it's basically bottom of the barrel for me. Okay, so then there's Haven. Okay, so I like Gear a lot from Adventures. Now, Gear doesn't give you any actions. Haven does. Haven does the exact same thing Gear does, except with Gear you get to draw 2 cards, and you get to set aside 2 cards for your next turn. Haven, you only get to set aside 1, and you draw 1, but you get an extra action. If I have no other action cards in my hand that give me extra actions, and I draw a card that doesn't give me actions, but it's an action card, am I really going to put that one card and set it aside for my next turn when I could use it this turn? I mean, if it didn't give me the extra action, then it would make more sense, and they'd be like, well, I played this, I got an extra card, but I don't have any way of playing it. But hey, I can set it aside for my next turn. Hey, that worked out well, okay. But most often the case, and then if that's the case, then what's the point of having all this extra text if you're only playing it for a card in action? It's like Pearl Diver now. It's almost pointless because of that. That's why I don't like it having the plus action. That's why I don't think this is a great card to begin with. That's why it's on the bottom of the barrel. Okay, Island. Now, at the beginning, Island was really awesome because we didn't have things like exile mats. And we didn't, which I love exile mats. And we didn't have distant lands for adventures when Seaside came out. But now that those cards are out there, because you can exile cards now, Island is basically obsolete. Okay? It's still really hard to pull off, of course. I mean, it's thematic at least. Yes, it is. It's thematic for Seaside, sure. But that's about it. It gives you 2 victory points. Okay, that's okay. You could potentially get another victory card to your island to thin out your deck. But it's really hard to pull off, And oftentimes I don't bother because I have a strong turn. I have a strong hand with this in my hand. So what's the point? And I don't have enough actions to also play this too. So yeah, that's why it's basically bottom of the barrel. There's not much to say about merchant ship except to say that it's completely boring. Okay? You get too many now and too many later. It's just boring. That's why it's the bottom of my deck. Bottom of the barrel. Okay, Explorer. Well, this one is okay. But you're really only playing it to gain silvers. You spend 5 money to basically gain silvers. You potentially could gain a gold, but I find myself maybe gaining 1 gold per game with Explorer at most likely. Sometimes maybe a couple golds, but most likely it's just gaining silver after silver after silver after silver. I just don't like this card that much. I don't hate it. But it's thematic that way, at least. It's definitely thematic. It's fun sometimes, but it's just not the best card in the world. And that's why it's right next to the 2 cards I hate. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about these cards much, other than the fact that I absolutely hate Lookout and Navigator, okay? I've had horrible games with Lookout. I mean, it's just horrible. I mean, yes, a lot of experienced players like this card. I do not. I am not one of them. I'm not potentially, I'm not a huge lover of trashing cards, but there are definitely a lot of better trashers out there, and this one is one of the worst trashing cards I've ever played with. Now, of course, it's not the worst because a lot of people still like this, but I'm not one of them. And Navigator, it's just boring because I'm using it to just look at my top 5 cards and then rearranging them, because most likely I'm not going to discard them. So, it's just boring. I just hate Navigator and I hate Lookout, and I'm not going to talk about them anymore because I just don't like these cards, period. Okay. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you guys liked this video, don't forget to leave a like, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.